Hello everyone. Welcome to another Secrets of Eventide stream. Boy, it seems like I don't get a chance to do this one as often as I've been planning to. Keeps getting eaten up by special events and stuff that I want everybody to be able to see. So, that said, I'm going to double down and continue to try and make these happen because I do think this is a great way for me to chat with all of you about some of the secrets behind the campaign, talk a little bit more, frankly, about some of my plans and some of the directions I'm hoping to go. I do think that that's important. It helps me kind of work some ideas out and formalize some things, but it also gives me some sounding boards and some folks to ask questions and get some ideas back. So we are going to keep doing these. I haven't been doing them as regularly as I had planned, but we're gonna redouble our efforts and see if we can get better on that front. So, here today, I figured we would talk about the Zankarr Imperium. It is a major part of the story of Alnir and the story of the world, and I do want to spend some time talking about it. In some of the past ones, we've had some really exciting, I thought really kind of exciting secret streams. We talked about magic and the planes, and these things are pretty foundational. But this really starts digging into something very specific, very, very rooted in the actual story of the world and less about metaphysics and how spells work and how spells don't work and how the planes and souls transit. All that stuff is kind of pretty opaque to most players' day-to-day experiences. But Zankarr, well, Zankarr's quite different. Zankarr is a big presence. So, I figured I'd break this down by talking about the history of Zankarr. That'll probably be the majority of this. Then I want to talk about life in Zankarr, and I also want to talk about some of the secrets of Zankarr. So, we'll start with the history and the story of Zankarr as a nation. So, its roots go way, way, way back. Right? The Zankarr as a kingdom marks its first moment at 19 TD. So that's, about 1100 years ago or so. But in reality, the story of Zankarr goes back even further than that. Right? So the story of Zankarr actually goes back to about negative 280 TD. So about 300 years before the founding of Zankarr itself. And that was the point at negative 280 TD when the first humans arrived in mass. There were humans before that, but they were pretty sparse, mostly being sea travelers from other parts of the world. But this is when the first humans arrived in mass in Alnir by coming from the north. They had crossed kind of over the frozen crown of the world from most people believe to be the place called Volsampra. Now, Volsampra there's no one living on Volsampra right now. It's not a place where people go. And it is rumored that that is where the humans originally are from, and some catastrophe that even they will not talk about drove them to make this migration. Now, these were all the humans that lived in northern Volsampra. There were humans in southern Volsampra as well. They fled via different means because whatever happened in the middle of the continent. So, and the other humans went to other places. So these humans made the long, treacherous trek across the northern top of the world and came into Alnir that way. And they, at first, kind of just spread out. They were clustered in the far north for quite a bit. So, they founded Varnathus, and they, started settling and living and spreading out. Many continued heading south. And eventually, they came and found places to live kind of in the cracks between the dwarven, kingdom and the dwarven conclave, and between them and the elven collective. So the elves at this time were a series of connected cities, basically small communities that all worked together to form one massive collective. And it kind of worked, it was like a representative democracy kind of thing. Each elven town would send its representatives to court, and they would make major decisions for the collective as a whole. And that's how the elves worked. The dwarves, meanwhile, have always lived under a rotating dynasty system, where there are 14 great houses in the dwarves, and they take turns being in charge. At this point in time, I'm not even sure I have written down what dynasty was in charge, but you go from negative 280 to 0, and during this time, the humans are arriving, and they're mostly settling in the unsettled lands, the uncontrolled lands, between the dwarves and the elves. And as a result, a lot of them are in the plains that are north of the major kind of mountain range to the south, on the southern edge of Alnir. There's a huge mountain range that runs through the south. And this is the heart of the Dwarven Kingdom, right? This is where most of their major cities are. They're in that southern mountain range, and some of their larger cities are also in the eastern mountain range. So the humans kind of settle in some of the plains between the two kind of larger empires, and they have small cities and towns and stuff. And, they start making themselves known. But the dwarves viewed all that land as theirs. And that's why just before 0 TD, now 0 TD is when matron Lomira Tamok comes into power, comes into authority in Skyhammer. But when she takes over, the dwarves are actually in active war with the humans. So the humans didn't want to be underneath dwarven rule. The dwarves viewed all the land that they were settled on as theirs, and there was a big conflict over this. And so this is when the humans are fighting against the dwarves, and in a shocking stroke, they take Skyhammer. So the dwarves are routed from their capital by the humans, who take it with, unconventional tactics. And this would actually mark the end of the war, because they didn't, the humans knew they couldn't keep it, and they had a rather brilliant, charismatic general by the name of Ralvan Zankarr, who, he knew he couldn't keep Skyhammer because there were far too many connections with the city to the deep undergrounds, and the dwarves were going to muster enough forces to drive them back out. But he saw this as an opportunity to instead sue for peace. So Ralvan went to the dwarves and said, hey, listen, why don't we call this whole thing off? You can have Skyhammer back. We'll give you back your capital instead of torching the place. We'll give it back to you intact if you give us this swath of land. So, and it's a swath of land that it wasn't mountainous. The dwarves didn't really care about it. But that moment in 19 TD, where Ralvan Zankarr and Lomira Tamok came to an agreement, would be the moment that Zankarr was founded. Okay, so Zankarr is founded. This is 19 TD. Not much happens for like the next 250 years, right? So Zankarr pretty much just is its own little kingdom, has its ups and downs. Ralvan's children, some of them end up taking over, and it kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. And whoever is in the throne takes on the last name Zankarr, even though there are some changes there, and it's not necessarily all Ralvan Zankarr's descendants. So 250 years go by, and then Eventide happens. So, the humans weather this relatively well. Their settlement is, their kingdom is not exactly huge at this point in time, and they weather Eventide as well as anyone does, right? And But that would be the moment that the fate of Zankarr would change dramatically. And not because of anything that happened during Eventide, but what happened after. So, the Kingdom of Zankarr is north of Skyhammer, kind of in the plains there, between the Dwarven, conclaves and the Elven collectives. So, it's kind of in this middle space. It's a good trade spot, but there's none to write home about. It doesn't even have a port. It's landlocked. But, it makes do. But when Eventide happens, things start changing. First of all, as I've mentioned in some of the other things, other discussions we've had, the elves and the dwarves, their nations start collapsing, right? So the elven birth rate crashes after Eventide. And as a result, there just aren't more elves being born. And every year, their numbers start dwindling. And with the dwindling population comes a dwindling power base, right? They stop being able to patrol all of the lands and connections between their various collectives. And as that happens, more and more beasts show up, more animals show up, places start to go wild. Same time, the dwarves, their birth rates are fine, but a bunch of them start going back underground and they don't come back. So the dwarven cities slowly turn into ghost towns. Now, there are other people living there, right? Just like there are other people living in the elven settlements. But they quickly find that they are almost alone, right? There are no more dwarves here. There are very few. And as the years go by, some of these remnants, some of these places start to look to Zankarr for protection. So, especially the ones right nearby, right? So Zankarr comes out of it pretty much unscathed, and then slowly begins gobbling up some of the small things, little outposts and stuff at first, little trading posts, little communities. Eventually, it snakes its way out to the water, right? It starts getting a line of trail of small communities and settlements that nominally pay attention to Zankarr policies and are friendly with Zankarr. And over the next 300 years, Zankarr just slowly expands. And it doesn't grow in leaps and bounds until 603 TD. 603 TD is when everything changes dramatically. So in 603, Zankarr annexes Skyhammer. Skyhammer is almost a ghost town at this point. And the queen of Zankarr at that time, Queen Damiara, changes the name of from the Kingdom of Zankarr to the Zankarr Imperium. And at this point in time, she actively begins annexing any city that doesn't have, a centralized government or doesn't have a strong control over its territory. And so she is coronated she's not coronated. She makes the proclamation in Skyhammer on the day that they take Skyhammer. So 603 is kind of the end of the Dwarven kingdom. That it's gone at this point in time. All that remains are a bunch of cities, many of which still have dwarves in them, but they don't have standing army anymore. They don't have, the ruling houses have all but collapsed, and there are far fewer dwarves in these places. So in a span of, almost no time at all, Zankarr just starts growing and spreading across Alnir. And they start eating up elven settlements and dwarven cities. Their primary focus is the dwarven cities. They do annex a number of elven communities, especially some of the bigger ones. There's one called... There are three in particular that they end up taking. One is Elsaron, one is Grogassa, and one is Erna. Grogassa is perhaps the most important one of those. It wasn't like a capital. They didn't really have a capital. They took turns meeting in various conclaves whenever they... or in various settlements whenever they had to gather together the folks and make decisions for the elves. But Grogassa is where the Great Library was. Or is. Actually, it's still there. So the Great Elven Library of Grogassa is something that they take pretty early on. So in those 300 years, they annex a number of major cities. And it's roughly in this order. They take Flame Tongue, they take Silver Spear, then they take Elsaron and Grogassa, they take Erna next, and then they finally complete, in more recent times, they take the eastern dwarven settlements of Frostbrand and Sunderwave. You'll notice the dwarven cities are all named after weapons. Some of those weapons you don't know. But they're all named after weapons. Because that city, whenever a dwarven settlement becomes of a certain size, the master smith of the city forges a brand new weapon that becomes the signature of that city. So each dwarven city, once it becomes a city, has a weapon that they invent. And that's where in Eventide, that's where the Flame Tongue came from. That's where Frostbrand came from. And then there's two other weapons in there. One's called Silver Spear, which is, unsurprisingly, a lightning-fast spear. And then there is Sunderwave, which is it is a port town, and that is a very powerful trident. So, yeah, that's in 300 years they just eat the entire center of Alnir. They literally come to control the entire middle of the continent. They don't own the North Band, they don't own the South Band, but they own the entire middle. And the only things that are keeping them from just annexing the rest of Alnir is the mountain range to the south kind of prevents them from easily taking the southern reach of Alnir. There is a gap in that mountain range, but that is where the Goblin Collective lives. That's their area. And they have, as of yet, resisted any overtures from Zankarr to become part of the Imperium. Then in the north, you once again have some geographical barriers. You've got the rotten peaks that are keeping them from getting kind of the eastern half of the north. And the western half of the north is where Varnathus is, and Varnathus is frankly too powerful for them to take right at the moment, considering how far north it is. It is very hard for Zankarr to take things far in the north just because of winter. So geography and weather are kind of the only things keeping them from eating all of Alnir at this point, and it's only a matter of time, most people believe, before they find a way to get around this and take the entire continent. So during all of this, by the way, in 742 TD, so this is about 500 years ago, the first Penumbrist occurs. Penumbrist is discovered by the first Penumbrist, who is Viclor Cyrian. So Viclor discovers the art of penumbry, and he's in Zankarr. And within 6 years, the first Penumbrist Academy opens in Skyhammer. This is important to note. So this is 742 TD. So this is, 500 years after Eventide. And it's about 400 years ago. So that kind of brings us up to the modern era. Their expansion has slowed in the past 100 or so years, as they kind of gobbled up all the easy stuff. Now they're having to gobble up some of the harder to reach parts of their continent. And as a result, their expansion has slowed. But, their ongoing line of queens continues to push this kind of imperial edict that Zankarr will come to control everything. So that's kind of the history of Zankarr. Let's talk about life in Zankarr for a bit. So inside the borders of Zankarr, there are rules that must be followed. Every town, and this is the thing about Zankarr. Zankarr is filled with rules and strictures. And ultimately, some people see those as very oppressive. Some people don't want to live under those sorts of guidelines, under those sorts of rules. And for those outside of Zankarr, right, it seems like this horribly oppressive regime. But for those living inside Zankarr, it's not as perhaps as bad as it seems. Most of the laws have to do with things that you would want laws for. Arson and murder and, robbery and all sorts of crimes. But there are some rules that kind of step further beyond that, right? So the only state-sanctioned religion is Valanav, the god of law and order. And every town must have temples to Valanav. The other goodly temples are frowned upon and generally speaking forced to close. Especially, they do still exist around the fringes of Zankarr, but once you get closer and closer to the heart of Zankarr, there are none. They have been driven out. But around the edges, they are tolerated. But the evil or chaotic deities are frankly, they are hounded and driven out. And frankly, offering up even a prayer to Sylvex is a crime. So you have priests of Valanav everywhere, and they kind of carry the word of law throughout Zankarr and work with the local governor and the local, magistrates and whatnot to make sure that Zankarr law is being followed accordingly. So on top of that, magic is pretty rare in Zankarr. In 1034 TD, Zankarr closes the last of its arcane colleges. So that's about 100 years ago, they closed the last of their arcane colleges. And with the clergy, the clergy of Valanav not actually being clerics, right? They're not using divine power, they're literally just priests. Magic has become a very rare thing in Zankarr life. There are, of course, still bards, but most of them, are very careful with how they use magic and aren't exactly flashy with it anyway. Then you have penumbrists, and penumbrists are all about the magic for themselves, so they're not really exactly going around healing people or anything like that. That's what I'm do. But mostly, by and large, folks have turned to alchemy to solve common problems and give remedies and aid to things. And magic has kind of mostly gone from day-to-day life. Now, what happens is when Zankarr annexes a place, it usually starts by them having spies in the place. So it starts with them having spies that are paying attention to local government, getting a sense of how things work here, trying to understand the ins and outs, what kind of resistance there might be, what kind of challenges they may face as an Imperium if they come rolling in here. So this is also not just to assess strengths, but to assess whether or not these folks are going to be a good part of Zankarr, the Zankarr society. So it starts with kind of clandestine espionage. And once they reach a certain point where they realize, yes, this place is a place we want to absorb into the Imperium, they will outright just have their agents approach the local government and say, we are giving you the offer to join Zankarr willingly. This is the only time you will receive this offer. If you do so, you, whoever the current leader is, will be made the de facto governor immediately. You will still get to be in charge. You still get to rule this place. However, in 10 years' time, there will be an election, and you can run for the job, but understand that this is no longer a hereditary title. Zankarr has democracy. The people get to elect their own governor. They also get informed that should you accept these terms, a garrison will arrive here from Zankarr to ensure compliance. And over time, the garrison, which will be people from other places in Zankarr, you get to replace it with people from here. But that will take time. It will take 10 years. So basically, they put like a 10-year box on a place that says, all right, in 10 years, you will elect a new governor, you will replace all of the members of the garrison with your own, maybe with a few exceptions of key individuals, and we will be bringing in temples to Valanav here and making sure that they follow Zankarr and Wales. With that comes the Zankarr Code of Justice, which includes rather harsh penalties for things like the magic they don't want to see, and crimes and not paying taxes to Zankarr, because that is a big component of being part of Zankarr. But it comes with benefits as well. You get access to the Zankarr market system, so all of your merchants can be licensed as Zankarrian merchants, which means they have access to all of the major markets of Zankarr, which gives them discounts and allows them to do things without having to pay certain foreign taxes and things like that. So there are benefits to this, and some places actually thrive quite a bit by joining Zankarr. Now, that said, over the years, as Zankarr has grown to be something just unimaginably large, most small communities, when that offer is made, they accept it. They don't want to, but they accept it, because the alternative is, if you don't accept it, then they move their army in to take it. And they will depose the local governor. That governor will then be thrown in jail, and if they're lucky, and Zankarr will put their own governor in place for 10 years, right? So the whole thing still happens. It just happens with the Zankarr governor and governmental system being installed over the old one. So basically, they are relying on the locals' sense of self-preservation to make it a bloodless conflict. So that's kind of what happens. And then after 10 years, they swap things out. But after 10 years, everyone's gotten so used to it. The thought of rebellion, although it has happened, it is very rare, because after 10 years, all of the businesses are now relying on Zankarr trade. All of the, there are lots of locals who are traveling around Zankarr, and they do bring things to communities. So what? So, okay. That's life in Zankarr. For the folks outside Zankarr, right, they see it as kind of a terrifying prospect, right? Every place that is outside Zankarr looks at Zankarr as a scary monster. And this all gets to kind of what I'm trying to do with Zankarr. I want to launch into some of the secrets. But first, the first one of these secrets is, what am I trying to accomplish with Zankarr as a story piece? And ultimately, I wanted to make sure that the continent of Alnir had a central conflict. And that conflict is the ever-expanding nation, or Imperium of Zankarr, right? That's it. That is the primary conflict of the nation. And I'm trying to walk, honestly, a really fine line here. I don't want Zankarr to be outright mustache-twirling evil. That's not their thing. But they are kind of imperialists. And it's not... I'm trying to stay away from, like, colonialist narratives, right? They're not, like, kicking the people out and taking their places. In fact, when they did take places that used to be part of other cultures, it's because those cultures were just gone, right? So they didn't go to war to take all the land from the dwarves and the elves. They just took it because the dwarves and the elves were gone. So that's kind of where I'm trying to walk this really fine line with Zankarr, wherein I want them to be a threat, but I don't necessarily want them to be a villain, if that makes sense. It's a nuance, because I don't want all of the people of Zankarr to be seen as disposable baddies you can go kill. I don't want any culture in my world to be that way. I want everything to have more nuance and be like, are there evil Zankarr generals and soldiers that go around and are terrible when they invade a place? Sure, yeah. But there are also those that show up and are genuinely just kind of like, yeah, well, this is how this works. This is my job. My job is to come and offer you this deal. I don't want to have to bring my forces in here. I don't want them to die. I don't want you to die. I don't want anyone to die. But I've been ordered to do this, and I'm going to do it. So here we are, right? I want it to feel more like a conflict that there isn't necessarily an evil motive behind it. There's more of a lawful motive behind it. And yeah, I'm seeing in chat that it does sound like parts of the Roman expansion. You're right, because I modeled it off that. this is very similar to how Rome expanded during its kind of area. They didn't go and kick people out. They just made them part of the Roman Empire. You know, so Zankarr, there are some echoes here that I'm pulling from. That is kind of an inspiration for this. Now, obviously, there's a lot of baggage there I don't want to pick up and things I'm not interested in doing. So Zankarr needs to be its own animal. But there are some inspirations behind how the Roman Empire was constructed. So, there's that. Let's talk about some of the secrets, though. Some of the things, there's obviously more than meets the eye going on here. So, everything I've set up to this point is frankly stuff that I think you can mostly cobble together from the player's guide information. I'm pretty sure some of it is stuff that I've been waiting to put into the GM's guide when I finally find more time to work on it. But there are some weird things going on in Zankarran politics, in the central heart of Zankarr. Because the things they are doing don't necessarily, like, why are they doing that? Why did they close down the last arcane colleges? Well, a big part of it is just that arcane magic isn't really working very well, and neither is divine magic. So the closing some of that down isn't some nefarious thing necessarily. It's more of a, well, you know, especially with like summon magic going awry, you know, the last time we had someone cast a summon magic, it summoned a whole bunch of creatures into this town that then didn't go away and caused, you know, harm and danger and all that kind of stuff. So there are things like that. But it does go deeper than that, because the Penumbrists are actually an incredibly powerful force inside Zankarr. This is not something that's public knowledge. It won't be generally something that the players know, at least not early on. Is that the, they're called, God, what are they called? The Grey League? What did I name them? Got it in here somewhere. Hold on. Half a second. Oh, yeah, no, it's up here in history. Yeah, so, the Penumbrists actually are incredibly powerful within the Zankarr Imperium, within the Zankarr Court. Yeah, the Grey Vanguard is what they're called. So the Grey Vanguard is kind of the elite military force of Penumbrists, and anyone showing any affinity for shadow magic, which is very common in humans, is sent to join them. Now, it's common in humans because there is a heritage that is added to Eventide that is called Echo Touched, which means you can trace your lineage back to those who crossed over from Volsombra, kind of more directly than most. And you carry some of that blood in you, and it manifests in kind of weird ways. They have low light vision, if I recall correctly. I have to double check. But they're also sometimes plagued by nightmares of sounds, things from some ancestral knowledge. So the Grey Vanguard actually has considerable power and sway within the Zankarr court. And that gets to the other weird thing. Stretching all the way back to Queen Damiara, all the way up to modern day, Zankarr has been ruled by queens. Queen after queen after queen after queen after queen. Before that, there were some kings. But in the past 500 years, it has 519 years, it has been queen after queen after queen after queen after queen. And they are all one line. So before that, there was a bit more of a court of royal families, some of which had power at different times. But Queen Damiara and all of her children have ruled from that day to this day. There are some that view that very strangely, especially considering the end result is the portraits of them almost all look the same. They're very similar looking rulers for 500 years, and most of them live good long lives. So in that period of time, there's been, you know, something like 15 or 16 of them, but they can all trace their heritage all the way back to Queen Damiara, who in 603 took Skyhammer and turned it from a kingdom to an imperium. So that's weird. Right? There are definitely folks who think that's kind of odd, and they should, right? Because there is something weird and unnatural going on there. And Queen Damiara, clearly had big plans for Zankarr. And there are some who believe, because it's true, that Damiara set down a roadmap for all of her descendants to follow. And they have been doing so faithfully for all of these years. So there's a lot of stories and rumors about the family, that they have various magic in their blood, that they are, in fact all penumbrous, that, there's all these rumors and thoughts that most people trade around just like you would any bit of rumor and gossip. But there is some grain of truth floating around in there. There is something very, very sinister going on in Zankarr. And since you are all here watching and you are lords and masters, I will tell you what it is. And I'm not going to be revealing this anytime soon, especially not to player characters. They're all Queen Damiara. There is no guide leading forward because it's all the same person. She has been cloning herself and taking over her body for 500 years. And that is what is at the heart of Zankarr. And why she is doing this and why the Penumbrists have so much power is all tied into that. The fact that this is a Penumbrist ritual that allows her to clone a body and then take it over upon her death. She has a daughter, and the daughter is a, young child when created, and she raises it, and then when she gets old, she takes over the body. And that is what has been happening for 500 years. So that's the secret at the heart of Zankarr, at least part of it. There's more to it, but it gets into some really kind of deep lore stuff for some of the bigger story implications of the world. There is something a bit more sinister going on at the heart of it. But at its crux, the reason why Zankarr has been so ruthless and dedicated to its cause for 500 years is because it's the same person giving the orders for 500 years. So, there you go. And I mean, Zankarr has spies everywhere, right? So, in talking, bringing this back around to the current campaign, the current story, the current bit of the world lore I'm building, which is all up in Wormbone. There are Zankarr spies in Wormbone. There's only a few. There's like 4. And they are doing what the Zankarr spies are there to do. They're assessing, they're trying to understand the local politics, the local military force. They are in different walks of life. One is in the household of one of the nobles. One is a cook at a bar. They're kind of all over the place. And they are basically, spying on the town. Now, will they become a major part of this first story? No, I don't think so. I don't want to really focus too much on Zankarr here in the early days. They're a looming threat. The players are too low level to do anything about Zankarr anyway. But they do exist. And they are part of that world, right? Because they're everywhere. They're in Vernathus, they're in Wormbone, they're in Tusktown, they're all throughout the north, right? And frankly, they're even beyond Alnir. They're certainly in the continents to the south. They're probably in Helenanthus. There are probably Zankarr spies on every continent in the world. Just because that is Queen Damiara's vision. Her vision is that she alone will rule over the entire planet. It'll take time. Time is something she has. At least time is something she thinks she has. But that's a different story. All right. So there we are. That's about all I want to share on Zankarr here today. I do see that there is a question or two. If folks have one or two more questions, I'd be happy to answer them here before we're done. I got a question of, that's pretty evil. What happens to the soul of the daughter? I think, honestly, through this ritual, the thing that is created is a clone. It's a clone that basically has her own mind in it already. It's just nascent, and she just takes it over. So I don't think it's so much of a, I destroyed the soul of a different sentient creature to take their body. I think it's the ritual here creates a cloned copy, but that cloned copy is born and must be raised. So it's a different kind of ritual. Now, whether or not there is a soul there that is being destroyed, I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, probably. But it is creepy. Yeah, I mean, it's meant to be disturbing, right? It's meant to be like a, oh, that's not right. That's not okay. Creepy fist and Dantalus. Yeah, kind of, right? So yeah, that's what's going on in Zankarr, right? And you know, there's more to it than this. You know, Damiara has a lot of deals and a lot of contacts in some pretty dark and unsavory places that have allowed all this to happen. So, but you know, in her eyes, it's all in the name of, you know, bringing her vision of peaceful society to the world. So she, you know, I always think the best villains are the ones that don't see themselves as evil. Damiara doesn't see herself as evil. She sees herself as an agent of law. In that she knows that watching, you know, as she grew up, watching other places suffer because their rulers passed away, because things didn't go the way they were supposed to. She views that as a failing, and that, you know, if only she could live this entire time, then, you know, she could ensure that the right choices were made. So like I said, everything when it comes to Zankarr is a very fine line to it. It's not an easy thing to pull off, because I do want it to be like, oh, that's not right, but not have it drift off into, you know, like I said, mustache twirling evil, right? It should be more nuanced than that. And that's kind of what I'm going for with all of Eventide, right? There are certainly places where cut and dry good and evil are going to be present. Yeah, undead are evil. You can go bash as much undead as you want. You know, but I don't want any peoples as a whole to be evil. I don't want any, you know, frankly, any creatures that are sentient enough to have language and have some sort of culture. I don't want them to be universally any alignment, right? You know, that just doesn't work for me. It doesn't jive for my vision of the world. Well, okay, so there is a thing that says whether or not the Penumbras see themselves as lawful. I don't know that they do, but Damiara certainly does. So I don't think the Penumbras view themselves that way. I think they don't view themselves in that lens at all. They work with different forces and are speaking to creatures, entities beyond these realms that whisper power to them. And for them, mortal laws and such concerns are beneath them. So I'm not sure that they view themselves that way, although they do work within that structure pretty easily, right? And that's an interesting thought. I haven't really played around with whether or not Penumbras as a whole see themselves as lawful. It wouldn't surprise me if the Grey Vanguard is, just by its very nature of being made up of nothing but Zankarr citizens, would by its very nature make it a pretty lawful organization. Now that said, the thing about a lawful organization, it doesn't mean that it's good. It just means it follows rules. So, you know, there's something interesting there. I want to play around with that. I want to roll that around. I hadn't really thought much about how Penumbras as an organization kind of works. Worth thinking about. All right. Well, unless there are any more questions, I think that's just about going to wrap it up here today. We'll keep it nice, short, and sweet for folks who want to come in and watch the replay. let's see. Yeah, okay. So our next stream, where this coming Tuesday, we'll gather together and talk about, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to talk about on Tuesday. Maybe I'll just do more mapping. God, I need to do more mapping. Yeah, our next stream for Eventide will be here on Tuesday. I'll post a link in the Patreon. I did just post up a giant post summarizing up all the videos and stuff over the past 2 months. So if there's anything you missed, go back and catch it. I do like to watch the video views on that to just see whether or not folks are absorbing this material. I am putting out quite a bit of it, and I want to make sure folks are getting the most out of it. So check that out. It has a big list of all the links, so you can go back and watch things easily. And it's got a few recommendations for if you're short on time and you just want to watch 1 or 2 things, hit these things. Most of the Secrets of Eventide videos have definitely been worth watching, because all of them have been jam-packed full of some pretty juicy tidbits. So that's what we got here today. And we will be back here in 2 weeks with another exciting Secrets of Eventide video. I want to thank you all for watching. We'll see some of you over in the Twitch stream here in about 15 minutes. We're going to be playing some more 7 Days to Die with my good buddy Dan. But thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for your support. Without all of you, none of this can happen. I'm getting a lot of really great art in, some really great stuff showing up. You know what? In 2 weeks, I bet you what I'll probably do is do some art looks. That could be really fun. Yeah, maybe we'll do that. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We will see you next time.